that there is a half-caste or black candidate for the Democratic nomination for one of the two main parties in the United States of America. If you actually go to many American cities like Chicago, from which this individual comes and within whose medical politics he cut his teeth, you'll realise that this is normality. Since all white immigration ceased into the United States, 70 million persons of colour have entered the United States in the last 35 years. That is the real legacy of the Kennedys in the United States. Forget the bonking, forget Marilyn Monroe, forget the scandals. The real change is the mass immigration which has occurred into the US as a precedent for us and the rest of the West since then, changing American cities and states out of all recognition. White Americans are tacitly almost a minority in California, almost a minority in Texas, a definite minority in New York State, certainly in New York City within New York State. These changes are evident, and the political class in the US, such as McCain and so forth, believe they're ineradicable. There are 18 million illegal immigrants in the US alone. And there is a debate internally that they should be naturalised, and the fact that they've essentially used criminal means to get into the country should be obviated, should just be ignored, and they should be given citizenship. In the rest of the West, and on liberal programming on the media tonight and elsewhere, somebody like George W. Bush is presented as a right-winger who's red in tooth and claw and puts the bombers in the third world and is a Christian fundamentalist and so on. He's in favour of naturalising 18 million illegal Mexican immigrants inside the United States, in the teeth of opposition from the centre and right of his own Republican Party, which is the centre-right party of the two blocs in the US. He's a moderate and a liberal and an internationalist on these sorts of issues. And as the political class in America and Europe chatters, the world changes around them and around their own populations. What most people do about these changes is to ignore them, to moan about them privately amongst their friends, to swear at the television when there aren't people that they don't know or about, to think that something should be done but they're not going to do anything themselves, to slightly curse some of the people in the past who've tried to do something about it while secretly admiring them, and to sit on their hands and wonder where it'll all end. But at least people think I can privatise my own life, I can look after me and mine, we live in a nice area, I can get private health insurance, I may have a chance to get my offspring into one of these academy schools where Labour ministers of course never send their own children. So we have a situation where increasingly people think that nothing can be done and they're very worried, but they'd rather do nothing but will moan in front of the box. But it's noticeable that certain straws are in the wind, and there is a feeling amongst our own people that something ought to be done. At the very least, something political ought to be done. We're 40 odd years on now from Enoch Powell's speeches. I saw a cover of a magazine on a London newsstand not so long ago called History Today, and it said, "Decades on from the Rivers of Blood speech. Powell, did he expose a nation's racism? Question mark." And it wasn't the title and all the politically correct spin and wraparound that interested me. It was the picture of Powell. Sort of badly taken colour photograph from the 1960s. It's a Tory rally, and yet you see the strength when Powell is speaking. You sense the power the man had when he was in his prime. After the second of the two Rivers of Blood speech, which was made in Birmingham, the first one was made in Wolverhampton, he had 1 million letters. 1 million letters. And 9 of them were against. People wanted him to become the leader of the Conservative Party at that time, which there was absolutely no chance of, and he was institutionally blocked off. But the interesting thing is he's the only Tory politician, probably in the last 50 years, that has had any support or credibility amongst white working class people. Fact. And interestingly, this is a group the BBC have become rather keen on recently, because there's been a whole series of documentaries called White, about the white working class and their danger and the opportunity, and have we neglected these people, and what do they really think? And they get us an alternative comedian, who I think is called Arthur Smith, with a husky sort of sympathetic Cockney voice to go around and interview old men and say, how has this area changed? Do you like living here? Do you like your new neighbours? And it's very carefully edited and it's spliced, and every other elderly white person on these estates makes a liberal remark, and yet the mass of the population has construed this as right-wing propaganda. When this candidate who won in Essex went out canvassing and leafleting with his team, people said, oh, we saw your propaganda on the news. We saw you on the BBC. And they were talking about this white programme, of course, because the mass of the population filter out all these little intermediate keys and steps that the BBC puts in, the contrary remarks, the ethnic statements, the Labour statements who say these people aren't so bad after all, they're my sort of people, the police chief who says it's not too bad, the liberal whites who've moved out and think it's better in Greater Essex and they're prepared to give everything a go. They filtered all that out, and they've understood that the establishment through the BBC is worried about what a considerable segment of the population who are the core of the Labour vote and the core of Labour's power in cities like Manchester really think. The Tories in a city like Manchester are hated, retrospectively, to a degree that some Southerners find it difficult even entirely to understand. But we're having a situation now where Labour, in its own heartlands, is becoming detested by many of the people that they went into business politically in order to represent. And why is this happening? True. It's happening because they've betrayed the people that they set themselves up to represent. The Tories never said they would do anything for white British people in cities who did manual and other jobs. But Labour said, we're your party, trust us, and we'll care for you, and we'll look after you. And after 100 years of the existence of the Labour Party, and 50-odd years since they formed a mass government in 45, 70 years since they first formed a government in 1924, what have they done? What have they done to areas that our people have had to leave and feel have been decimated in their wake? What have they done? What have they done in relation to our people and where they need to live and the sort of jobs they need to do in order to sustain families?